Molly Kingsley, how swiftly, in your view, should schools be reopened?
I mean, I think schools have already gone to a lot of work in putting together, very sensible, respectful hygiene measures. I think we would like to see them open now as soon as possible, or we would like to see an assessment of the harm that keeping them closed is causing.
Well, what is, in your view, the harm that keeping them closed is causing or risks causing?
I think it's threefold. I think the first harm that a lot of people have been focused on is, the educational disparity that is, I think an educational gap is now a chasm, and that seems to be widening almost by the day. I think for many parents, actually, that's almost becoming a less of a concern. I think many of us are becoming very worried about the mental health impacts. And I think also there are physical harms, actually. So there was a very worrying report last week out from China, a big report in China suggesting there's a link between, excessive screen time and lockdown and deteriorating eyesight. There's similar concerns about posture. There's obviously huge concerns about increasing obesity. So I think there are a range of harms, some of them potentially long lasting to children.
Sammie McFarlane, does any of that persuade you that really schools need to open ASAP?
I think when we're talking about opening schools in a pandemic with a virus that we don't yet understand, we need to be thinking a bit beyond eyesight and posture, and we need to be thinking about the children who have got organ damage, who are having seizures, who have been paralysed by this, by contracting COVID. And we've got children that have, most of the children who were ill right back in March are not yet showing signs of getting better. And worse than that, many are declining without support. And for me, it's not even a question. Opening the schools at this point in time would be insane.
And you've had COVID yourself, and your daughter is still ill, right?
That's correct. We were both ill in March, and unfortunately spent nearly 8 months on pretty much essentially a bed rest, both fit and active and healthy before, and we're still not better. She hasn't been able to go back to school. She hasn't been able to resume normal activity, and she still is waiting to be seen by a consultant and get some answers.
Molly Kingsley?
Look, I mean, Sammie, that's heartbreaking, and I'm really sorry to hear that, of course. I think what I would say to that is the proportion of children in particular that are at risk of serious illness from COVID, and I appreciate you have been very unlucky, is very, very, very small. It is a tiny percentage of the people who are at threat from this virus, whereas school shutdowns are jeopardizing the lives of millions of children.
Sammie?
I mean, we need to think about the way that the government is reporting the figures. So they talk very clearly about children getting mild symptoms, and actually in most cases, as Molly just said, that's true. Children mostly do get mild symptoms. The tragedy comes sort of between 2 to 6 weeks after we see that the children decline at a rate of knots, and then the more sinister symptoms, the more frightening symptoms come to light. And our concern is that there is no understanding of this virus, and we don't know what the long-term effects are going to be. And when you're talking about, we've now got nearly 800 children in our group that are all experiencing these really sinister, disabling symptoms, and they're not getting better. So if they've not got better in 9 to 10 months, can we be sure that they will get better?
Well, Sammie, I wonder if I could ask you to consider the mental health consequences, because obviously there's very significant, for a minority, there is a very significant physical health consequence. But we're reporting tonight the Children's Commissioner for England talking about 1 in 6 children and young people now having a probable mental health condition. She talks about the very heavy toll on children. Does that concern you, that yes, you might be keeping people physically safe, but you're endangering their mental health?
Well, first, I'd like to address your point saying that we're talking about a minority. So we don't know if our children, our group of children with long COVID are a minority, because, of course, long COVID isn't counted. So we can't say for sure what the figures are. What we do know is that that most children who get unwell go on to have long COVID, because we can see that from the figures. It's very clear from the figures. And we know that children's mental health is affected by by lockdown. Of course it is. Everybody's mental health has been affected by the pandemic, but you have to balance that off with long-term consequences that could be disabling for the rest of their life. We need to be in a situation where we're looking at the bigger picture. So health and well-being could be improved, for example, if schools were closed and children were able to maintain good relationships with grandparents.
Well, Molly, this is the problem, isn't it? That we know so little relatively about COVID that we could be storing up huge problems for the future. Until we know more, we've got to play safe with schools, haven't we?
I mean, I would use that line to support exactly the opposite argument, actually, which is we know so little about what we are doing by closing schools. You know, you talk about mental health, and actually you said 1 in 6 children. Well, actually, you know, I was looking at a figure this morning that said 1 in 4 children, 1 in 4 young people now say they are unable to cope with life. What does the long-term consequence of that look like? No one knows. We've not been here before. Likewise, on eyesight, actually, I think it's really interesting. You know, Sammie, I do understand that eyesight versus life, you know, it's quite stark. But actually, for me, and as the mother of a 7-year-old who's now, you know, rubbing her eyes every day, it's a really big thing. You're talking about permanent eye damage here. Like, this is not something to be taken lightly. And I think and I totally take the point, we may not know the long-term implications of COVID and long COVID, but I think we can use all those arguments. Exactly the same can be said on the other side, and this affects millions of children.
Sammie?
I'm so sorry that your child's suffering with her eyes, and I really feel for her. We've got children who can't eat, who can't walk, who can't talk, who can't swallow, and I just feel that we have to really think about this very carefully. I don't want anybody else's child. I don't want my child, your child. I don't want anybody's child to have to go through what we are seeing in this cohort of children. It is Russian roulette. There is no telling what version of this of long COVID or of coronavirus symptoms that you will get. And we just need to really protect a generation of children.
But Sammie, this could go on for years. COVID could be with us for years to come. How long before you start to return our children to some kind of normality with schools reopening?
So we're very clear. We do not believe schools should be shut. We want children to be in education, but we need to know that those places of education are places of safety. So we need to look at talking about the aerosol transmission. The government needs to accept that the virus is spread via aerosol transmission, and we need to implement change in schools so that children can return and they can feel safe. And the fact that the children know, they hear it on the news, they hear it from their parents, they hear it in society, they know the virus is not safe, and that also plays a part in affecting their mental health. They need to feel that they can return to their school and feel safe. Imagine if their teacher got COVID and died, or their parent got COVID and died. That's going to affect their mental health. If we can give them a place of safety to return to, then we will very much be pleased to see schools opening and children back and enjoying blended learning where there are less children on site, less risk, and hopefully being able to strike a balance.
Molly?
I mean, look, you know, I think no one could disagree that we want schools to be safe. And I think what we would say is, you know, we agree there is a need for proportionate safety measures that are not harmful for children. You know, we would agree with that. I think you get into a difficult territory when you talk about fear. You know, I think adults have a tendency to project our own fear onto children. I think certainly, again, from what I've seen of my kids and the kids we hear about in the group, children are desperate to be back with their friends. And actually, my fear is that we are causing them more harm by keeping them out of school. But that is my fear.
Molly, Us for Them is backed by quite a few anti-lockdown Conservative MPs. Is there a sense that this is less of a sort of grassroots movement than a political campaign, which has quite a libertarian streak?
It certainly wasn't until a few days ago. I mean, look, obviously we're aware of the press. We are very much a grassroots campaign.
Have you been hijacked, though?
I don't think we've been hijacked. No, I think it so happens, and I think it's really unfortunate that this debate has fallen on such party lines. I do not understand it, and I wish people from all sides of the political spectrum would reach out and get on board, because, you know, I do not see myself as political. I don't think I don't even know who my co-founders voted for, and I don't want to know. So for us, this has always been about the welfare of children. Whoever, you know, backs what we're saying and wants to get schools open, please come and join us. It is not a political organisation. I have no desire to be a political organisation.
Sammie, has the question of reopening schools and repealing lockdown become politicised? Is it now a question of whether you're sort of pro-masks, pro-vaccine? You know, it's divided.
Yeah, I'm also going to agree with Molly. I'm not a political person. All I care about is the health and well-being of children. For me, you know, we're seeing the very raw edge of the you know, COVID infection, and children aren't getting better, and we're not able to access services because there are too many barriers that we need to climb. So until we can have a really honest discussion about how the virus is transmitted, how we're going to improve the situation in schools so that children can return safely, I don't feel opening schools is the right way to go. I do want schools open, and I desperately want my child back in school. Unfortunately, the majority of the children in our group, they're not well enough to attend school, and we don't know when they're going to be well enough. And we don't want other parents to be in that situation.
And Sammie, would you accept that hard evidence that the children in your group are suffering these very debilitating symptoms because of COVID, that evidence is hard to come by, isn't it?
Not in all cases. So in the original cohort of people that were ill back in early March, April time, or you couldn't get tested if you weren't hospitalised. So they've got clinical diagnosis in some cases, not in all cases, because not all doctors will give clinical diagnosis. That's still very much a battle that, you know, we're trying to win. It's now much more accepted in the adults, but for children, it's a little bit more challenging. But most of the children do have positive COVID test, and then getting the long COVID diagnosis becomes the problem. Because of course they often recover. They often have mild symptoms, initial recovery, and then have a decline within, you know, within weeks. And that can be absolutely harrowing for parents. Or it could be a simple flare-up of rashes. The symptoms, there are 100 symptoms of long COVID, and you don't know what version you're going to get.
Finally, a question to each of you. Sammie, your situation with your daughter, are you able to tell us a little bit more about what she's suffering from now?
Yes, certainly. Yeah. So she got ill in March. She had very mild symptoms. We isolated her in her room before she, as soon as we recognised that she started to show symptoms, and she felt fine for 4 days and didn't want to be in her. Well, she did want to be in her room because she didn't have to do chores. But then she started to become symptomatic, and she had, you know, a very mild fever, nothing significant, a bit of a cough. And felt a bit achy and very, very tired. She then made a recovery within about 3 weeks. She started to, you know, be a bit out and about in the garden and sort of seem a bit more like herself. And then within another week or so, she then deteriorated and had heart pain, dizziness, insomnia, inability to walk. She was a ballet dancer. She has had to use the walls to get from the bedroom to the toilet. She has often fallen off the toilet. She has had all of her meals served to her in bed because she doesn't have the energy to hold her head up to eat her food. She has got what else has she got? Brain fog, menstrual cycle changes. She's had appendicitis pain. She's got ulcers in her mouth. I mean, it is a multi-systemic condition. It is just awful. And of course, normally if your child is ill, you'd be able to give them answers, or you'd be able to turn to a doctor for support. But there isn't any, because nobody has trod this path before. So we don't have answers.
And Molly, on the other side of the coin, what would you say is the toll taken on your family and other families you know by not being at school and by lockdown persisting?
Look, I mean, I will freely admit I'm one of the lucky ones. My kids are, two of the lucky ones. The school has been really, really trying, and the quality of learning is as good as can be expected, but it's still just not the same. And I think, as I said at the beginning, I'm becoming quite concerned about the length of time. They're 4 and 7, they're young, the length of time without seeing or interacting with friends. And actually, listening to all of this, to me, it just reinforces the need to kind of put differences aside and find a solution that means that kids do have social interaction and education that isn't just being plonked in front of a laptop, because I think we're all agreeing that is just not working for so many kids.
Molly, it sounds like Sammie might have changed your mind a bit.
I don't think, no, I think we should get schools back, and I think we should get schools back, with sensible and proportionate hygiene measures, and that's what we've said all along. I think there are people who would have the position being much more polarized, actually, but that's just my take.
Sammie, has Molly changed your mind at all?
No, not at all. And I mean that with deep respect, Molly. I know what we're seeing in the group, and when we're seeing parents having to give their children CPR and having to try and fundraise for stair lifts to be able to get them up to bed, and those children were previously, captains of the football team or whatever was going on, I just can't relate at all, I'm afraid. But I do agree with Molly that it would be great to see a collaborative approach on how we could get kids back to school. But I would be interested to ask Molly what she feels would be the appropriate measures to enable that to happen.
Sure. I mean, look, I think there's been a lot of work, obviously, that's gone into making schools COVID safe. And I think from the very beginning that most of the measures that Department for Education have proposed seem eminently sensible. So more spacing, hand washing, catch it, kill it, bin it, all those things make very good sense. So they would be the measures that I would say we should use to get kids back.
What I would really love, Molly, what I would really love is for your family not to be in the same situation as our families are. On our website, we have a video called How to Make Schools Safe, and it talks about the aerosol transmission of coronavirus, and it talks about how we can reduce risks for ourselves and our teachers and our children's friends. And I would love you to watch that and stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you, Sammie.
You'll watch the video?
I will watch the video, of course.
Molly Kingsley and Sammie McFarlane, thank you both very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.